screen. Thank you. Good evening. I'm Steve Piscatelli, one of the board members for Beaches Watch, and I will be filling in for our president, Maria Mark, this evening. Welcome to our monthly meeting. This meeting is being recorded. You can find, it will be posted tomorrow. You can find it on our YouTube channel, our Facebook page, as well as our website. Couple of housekeeping things before we get into the meat of the program. You'll see on the screen there our 2021 Beaches Watch membership. It's time to renew if you have not already, and go knock on your neighbor's door and ask them to join also. 15 for the individual, 20 for the family, 5 for students. So we appreciate your support. We need your support, and please renew or join up for the first time. At the bottom of that screen, you'll see a great photo of one of our board members, Mr. Dane Gilbert and Maria Mark, but in the middle is the most important person, and that is Colby Smith. We send congratulations to him. He was our Flan Sharp Memorial Scholarship recipient from Fletcher High School. So congratulations to Colby for a job well done. A few other announcements. If you have not already, you'll see at the top of the screen to urge Governor DeSantis to veto HB 403. You see once again, the little description there. It would completely preempt our local governments from any regulations on home-based businesses. If the governor signs it, the bill would allow commercial businesses to operate out of a home in our neighborhoods. So if you have not, send your voice to Tallahassee. You'll see there is the email for Governor DeSantis, as well as a Monday through Friday phone number. On July the 5th, we have our annual day after July 4th beach cleanup from 7 to 9. The locations where the folks fan out are Atlantic Boulevard, Seagate Avenue, and Beach Boulevard. And then also, if you would please save the date, July 7th is our next meeting. We will have our annual police panel, 2021 Beaches Police Panel. And our speakers will be the chiefs from the various communities. Mark it on your calendar. Okay, enough of me. Let's get into the program tonight. Tonight's our annual legislative update, the good, the bad, the ugly of the 2021 legislative session. And we have with us tonight, in alphabetical order of the communities, Kevin Hogenkamp, the Atlantic Beach Deputy City Manager. Wave to everybody, Kevin. And then we have Mike Stefopoulos, Jacksonville Beach City Manager. And Stephen Wynn was not able to join us tonight. He was scheduled to, wanted to, but he was not feeling well. Again, when we are able to compile questions that weren't answered, we will get those to Stephen as well. So we're going to turn this over. Mike and Kevin have 35 minutes from this point, and then we will get to your questions. Remember the chat board. You can put your questions. All right, gentlemen, thank you for joining us. It is all yours.
Thank you so much. I'm Kevin Hogenkamp. Mike graciously let me go first, and then he's going to do the hard part. Good evening, everyone. As a matter of introduction to tonight's topic, I thought I'd start off by noting that cities in Florida pay for membership in the Florida League of Cities, which is our trade organization, so to speak. Throughout the year, the League's expert staff researches for us and speaks for us, member cities. Most notably, the League fights to protect our ability to do our jobs as elected and administrative officials to best serve our residents and our businesses. What the League is fighting for specifically is something that Beaches Watch members are certainly familiar with. It's called home rule, which is the concept of city governments addressing local problems with local solutions with minimal state interference. This power enables cities to consider, to adopt, to revise, to repeal its own laws without going to the legislature and asking for permission. It's a foundation upon which cities in Florida build their governmental structure. Put candidly, if not harshly, when it comes down to it, city governments simply can be neither free nor responsible unless they are guaranteed the right and the compulsion to decide purely local matters for themselves. Someone famous said that, not me, once upon a time. But as this audience knows, the attackers of this fundamental right to local governments, to home rule, are some members of the Florida legislature, many of whom tend to serve us very well otherwise, which brings us to the Home Rule Hero Award. Let's see, I'm gonna advance that. I'm sorry about that. So all politics is or are local, and successful advocacy starts not in Tallahassee, but in our communities. The Home Rule Heroes, as identified by the Florida League of Cities for their work before and during the 2021 legislative session, are the smarter among the panelists tonight. Mike, congratulations and thank you for your great work. Jacksonville Beach Mayor Chris Hoffman, Atlantic Beach Mayor Ellen Glasser, and my hero in the arena of a local citizen fighting for good government, and that's Jacksonville Beach City Council member Sandy Golding, who we all know and love. So that's the intro. I'm going to turn it over to Mike to continue the presentation.
Thank you, Kevin. One of the things that we wanted to point out to the participants this evening is the fact that the Florida League of Cities is not just reactive. I think a lot of people during the course of the year hear about legislation that's being proposed and the fact that we are being asked at the last minute to either support it or fight against it with our local legislators to try and stop something from going through or get something better to go on the books. We wanted to make sure that you all realize that the Florida League of Cities actually works round the clock 12 months a year in order to not just try to stop bad legislation from becoming law during their 60-day session, but also to identify those issues that are most important to communities on a statewide basis and to actively lobby those positions during the course of the entire year. The Florida League of Cities actually sets up 5 different policy committees. And this Friday is actually the kickoff meeting for each of those 5 committees, where each committee will try to identify 2 priorities for a total of 10 for Florida League of Cities that will become the priorities for the next upcoming session. In previous years, ironically enough, I think it was just 3 years or so ago, the #1 priority was actually home rule. It wasn't an individual issue, it was home rule, and that was because the number of preemptions that legislators were proposing on an annual basis was getting completely out of hand. So the #1 lobbying issue was to remember that home rule is not just something that we would like to have, it's also an entitlement to us through the state charter. So with that, we wanted to talk to you a little bit about what the priorities were this previous year so that you had an understanding of what were the issues that we were lobbying with when we met with people like Senator Aaron Bean or Representative Cord Bird on a regular basis. So the first three that you see on the slide, the first one is short-term rentals. And clearly, we as cities in the Florida League support the continued rights and if not expansion of rights to local governments to regulate short-term rentals. There are some preemptions in place that prohibit us from doing certain activities. Our goal was to not only stop the bleeding with regards to the preemptions, but to actually get some of those authorities back at the local level. The second one was sales tax fairness. For local businesses, this is something that they had been dealing with for quite some time, which is businesses that are located outside the state of Florida and make sales to Florida residents and other businesses online. Even though they were supposed to be paying taxes, there was nothing that mandated them to actually pay taxes to the state of Florida. So sales tax fairness is something that was very high on the radar. The third one is one that you've heard a lot of over the last month or so, and that's with regards to cybersecurity. I think we all saw just how vulnerable systems across the entire nation are. For instance, we heard about the Colonial Pipeline. Last year, we heard about federal software systems that were basically violated by going through a third-party vendor's access into the federal system. And here at the local level, if you were to go to the internet and do a search, you would find that on an annual basis, there are a handful of communities, to include other state agencies, that ultimately become hacked and have their data held for ransom. So cybersecurity is another large issue, especially as technology is only getting higher use, not lower use, throughout the state and the country. Discharge to surface waters is another issue that we've been trying to work in partnership with across the state and with state legislators. We understand that there are issues with algae blooms and other types of contaminants on a statewide basis, and we wanted to work with the state to get to the elimination of discharges where practical. We'll talk a little bit about that later on with regards to legislation that actually did pass. Affordable housing. There's a Sadowski Trust Fund that is set up and is specifically to support affordable housing on a statewide basis. And it is not uncommon that on a somewhat regular basis, the state goes in and actually sweeps the funds and uses them for other purposes. And that's something that we felt we needed to stand up for, especially for communities where the cost of housing is getting out of reach for the workforce within their community. Annexation is another one as well. It may not be as large of an issue here in Duval County and in Southeast Florida, but other parts of the state, annexation is definitely an issue where the municipalities are competing for unincorporated territory and they butt up against each other, and it just creates all sorts of problems. So, and counties don't always want to give up the land for incorporation either, which creates a problem. And the last one is transportation funding and mobility plans. For anyone who's been to the major metro areas across the state, starting with Orlando to our south, you know that transportation is getting a little bit out of control in some areas. There are some state regulations in place that restrict you from doing certain things, and in some cases restricts the DOT, puts parameters on what they can and can't do. We wanted to make sure that the state is staying as flexible as possible to meet all future transportation needs and not having rules in place that effectively handcuff us going forward. So that was a quick overview of the, oh, I'm sorry, there's a couple more. Digital divide. That's one with regards to broadband internet access. Obviously, if you're in a major metro area, chances are you actually have a choice of providers. But when you go to the more rural portions of the state, including those counties that are considered impoverished or low income counties, they have difficulties getting some of what we consider to be basic services in metropolitan areas. We wanted to make sure that communities across Florida all had equal access to internet, high-speed internet, and the ability to do work and education and other functions. And then the last is resilient and sustainable Florida. I think that pretty much speaks for itself if you take a quick moment to read what's on there. It's everything from water quality improvements to natural resource protection. We recognize that the state of Florida is huge with regards to the land mass area, the number of metropolitan areas, the tourism industry, which we are known for. And if we're not able to work positively across governmental lines to keep all of that in balance, any one of those could end up jeopardizing the state's future. So that's a little bit of the legislative priorities that we went into this year trying to push. And with that, we'll now start talking about what actually came up in front of the legislation for either discussion, in some cases vote, and in some instances it may be sitting on the governor's desk. And we're sitting here crossing our fingers, hoping that he either will or will not sign it based on which document it is. So the first one that we're going to talk about is vacation rentals. As we indicated, that was a priority for the Florida League. This is something that the Florida League was actually proactive on this year, not just with pushing for a position, but actually putting alternatives in front of legislators. I believe Councilmember Golding was actually on a couple of discussions where we tried to sculpt what language would look like going forward. I know that our previous mayor, Charlie Latham, was involved at the start of those conversations. The big thing was that there was a push from Representative Fisher to basically undo any local registrations So while we were trying to work positively with some legislators, there were other legislators that were looking to further the preemption and basically remove any ability of local government to regulate short-term rentals. The good news was that this basically got postponed for the year. It did not progress either positively or negatively, which means we're still under the same rules for at least another 12-month window. Not necessarily a bad thing, but also not a good thing. So Kevin, you got the next one.
All righty. I think this would fall under the category of bad, if not ugly. And this is a bill regarding home-based businesses that was opposed by the League of Cities. It preempts the regulation of home-based businesses. It provides that local governments may not take any action to license or otherwise regulate a home-based business except as authorized specifically in the bill that was passed. It specifies that a home-based business that operates from a residential property may operate in an area zoned, only in an area zoned, and not be regulated or licensed in a manner that's different from other businesses. This is a classic example of the state getting in the way of the people that we go and elect and the people that they hire to run cities, to listen to the people they work for and the businesses they work for when they pass laws. This is the state intervening, which we would argue is contrary to the Florida Constitution. Mike?
So the next one, as you can see, is the sales tax fairness priority. That was one of the Florida League priorities for the year. The good news was not only did it pass through legislation, but it was signed by the governor on April 19th, and it will take effect July 1st. So this is one that was supported by local governments, supported by the Florida League. And the good news is those out-of-state retailers and marketplace providers with no physical presence in Florida are now required to collect sales tax on taxable items delivered to purchasers in Florida. Basically, it's a good thing. It will put our brick and mortar businesses on par and on even footing with out-of-state internet-based corporations. So it's a good one. It's a win.
So is this one, and it's a bill that has to do with COVID-19 liability. It was supported by the League and its member cities, approved by the legislature and signed by the governor, and is now effective. This bill adds lawsuit protections for businesses, local governments, universities, and other public entities that may be facing exposure to claims related to COVID-19. I do know some people in the business of some lawyers who don't like this bill, but the League certainly supported it, and we appreciate the legislature and the governor for supporting it.
This next one needs a little bit of a precursor for the audience so you understand why this one was so important. It is not uncommon for governmental agencies to receive a flurry of lawsuits over the course of the year for everything from a trip and fall on a sidewalk to a trip and fall inside one of our facilities to a vehicular accident that might occur involving one of our vehicles. Sometimes those lawsuits are legitimate and the cities have to do what is right, and we carry insurance as a result. But also we can receive a lot of frivolous lawsuits too. And that is not uncommon as well, because government is viewed as the deep pockets in any type of a legal or lawsuit type situation. For a long period of time, the state of Florida has had what it calls sovereign immunity limits that are passed on to the governmental entities within it. So if you take a look at the slide, you'll see that the current law sets the statutory limits at $200,000 per individual claim and $300,000 per actual incident where a city is involved. We've had some legislators who have said that the numbers have not changed in too long a period of time, and they need to be escalated along the lines of a consumer price index or something else to keep up with what's happening in the economy. So the bill that was being proposed this year was to increase the limits to $500,000 per claim and $1 million per incident. It's not uncommon for a governmental entity to perhaps have anywhere from 0 to 1 or 2 cases a year that might end up hitting either of those two limits. So for small communities, this could have been devastating. with regards to effectively doubling and or tripling their annual insurance payouts for claims against them. So I think we recognize that at some point something will likely happen, but right now the lower that number stays, the better it is for local governmental agencies.
Continuing the theme, the legal theme here, I suppose this was a good outcome. It'll be better if it just disintegrates before the 2022 session. The league opposed the Attorney General interference bill, and it was postponed. It would have authorized the Attorney General to take over or abate local government civil actions that involve multiple local government plaintiffs on matters of great governmental concern. The bills were retroactive and could have adversely affected legal actions pertaining to opioids and other substances.
This next one needs a little bit of background information as well. And I'm not sure what Atlantic Beach and Neptune Beach do for impact fees, but each community across the state usually has a variety of impact fees that are charged to developers at the time that development is constructed. In some instances, those impact fees have not been evaluated and or adjusted for a number of years. This bill would have effectively said, if you are behind on adjusting your impact fees, too bad, so sad, you can only increase them a certain amount in a certain period of time. So to give you an example, if you were a community that had a parkland dedication fee associated with residential construction, and the last time you did an assessment of what parkland dedication fee should be was 1995, and it was based on 1995 real estate prices on a cost per acre, you may turn around and say, gosh, our numbers are so far out of whack, we really need to double or triple that number in order to be equitable with what the new parkland dedication fee should be. The bill that was proposed was, if you were looking to raise your impact fee by more than 25%, you had to increase it by 2 installments to get to that increase. You could not do more than half of it at a time. If you wanted to go between 25 and 50% impact fee increase, you needed to do it over a 4-year window. And you were not allowed to increase an impact fee more than 50%, period. So for some communities where they are behind in adjusting their impact fees, this would have been very detrimental to them in order to collect the revenues necessary to make improvements to offset the cost of development occurring in their community.
That bill would have certainly adversely affected the city of Atlantic Beach and the residents who live here, and we are really grateful for the league's work in getting that watered down. Yes, we do have development fees in AB. The next 2 bills to address that the league opposed, both passed. They deal with energy infrastructure. One expressly preempts local governments from banning gas stations and associated infrastructure that's necessary to provide fuel to gas stations. The bill also prohibits local government from requiring gas stations to provide electric vehicle charging stations. That bill will take effect upon being signed by the governor. The second bill preempts local governments from prohibiting or restricting various types of fuel sources. This one did get watered down some, maybe that's not the best phrase, but had a more favorable outcome in terms of local government and our residents because of the great work by the league.
This next one, entitled Reclaimed Water, is one we talked about at the beginning. It was a priority for Florida League of Cities, and we were working proactively with many legislators to try and get what we felt was appropriate language in place. It did take a little bit of a side derail as it went through committees with some language changes. The long and short of it is that it will require certain wastewater utilities across the state of Florida to eliminate surface water discharges within a 10-year time frame. The big thing, as you see from the bottom, is that it doesn't take into account the financial impact to your individual community. Instead, it takes a look at how the water is being disposed of and whether or not it has a positive, neutral, or negative impact on the environment. In the case of Atlantic Beach, Neptune Beach, and Jacksonville Beach, all three of us will be impacted by this rule. In particular, all three of us currently have our wastewater treatment plants manifolded together with a discharge that occurs up by Mayport. We are going to have to figure out what to do with our effluent from our pollution control plants. And we will have options that are available to us. But as the dates show, we have until November of 2021 to identify what we think our plan is going to be. And then we have 10 years to make it happen. And I can tell you from an engineering and construction perspective, that's not as long of a period of time as you may think. So this is going to be a fun one over the next several months.
The legislature approved the Emergency Powers of Political Subdivisions bill that was opposed vehemently by the League and its member cities. This legislation amends the Emergency Management Act to address threats posed by pandemics and other public health emergencies. It requires any emergency order issued by a local government to be narrowly tailored to serve a compelling public health or safety purpose and be limited in scope to reduce any infringement on individual rights. All emergency orders, except those relating to hurricanes and other weather emergencies, automatically expire 7 days after issuance and may be extended by a majority vote of the governing body in 7-day increments for a total duration of 42 days. In the case of COVID-19, that means we would have had to have brought our city commission together weekly for more than a year to take action rather than having the city manager and mayor sign the emergency orders.
This next one is a fun one, and I will just let the audience know that occasionally legislation gets filed by an individual legislator because of something that has personally happened to them in the past year. In this particular instance, I don't know what happened to Mr. or Mrs. Federhoff, but I'm sure it had something to do with their own personal house or a house that was next to their house, and they were not happy about it, and they thought they would propose legislation to make sure it never happens again. So in this particular instance, what came out of the box for a proposed legislation was that governmental entities could not require any type of architectural standards on buildings, period. And once the Florida League of Cities realized what that impact would mean, we quickly gathered a lot of information and were able to, as it says here, we were able to water it down, which is good because we tried to point out to the legislators that would be discussing this. We have community redevelopment agency districts. We have historic districts. We have communities with deed restrictions, and that there needs to be some type of exemptions in place. We can understand that a city should not necessarily get involved with what the color of a house should be, but clearly there are certain areas within local jurisdictions where there should be some say as to the architectural features and or thematic development that's occurring to make sure it matches the rest of that particular district. So the good news was it was watered down to the point of neutrality as opposed to being vehemently against it.
That one had a fortunate outcome, unlike this one that has a similar backstory. And this was a bill regarding governmental actions affecting private property rights, opposed by the League, of course. And this becomes law October 1st, and it amends the state law to provide remedies to landowners whose property is burdened by local government regulation of concern to cities. This bill amends the term action of a governmental entity to now include the passing of an ordinance or regulation that diminishes a property owner's property value, even if that ordinance or regulation is not applied to the property.
This last one that we have here is preemption of local occupational licensing. Again, I'm guessing that perhaps Harding is a tile worker or a painter. But clearly there are some local government agencies around the state that have taken their occupational licensing and started to applying it to businesses or to trades workers that have never been applied to before. And the state stepped in and tried to create some defining boundaries between who and what types of businesses are okay for occupational licenses and which ones are not. If you dive a little bit deeper into this particular House bill, you'll see that it has a whole list to include painting, flooring, cabinetry, interior remodeling, driveway and tennis court installations, handyman work, decorative stone tile, plastering, stucco, caulking, awning installations, and ornamental iron work are now all specifically exempted from occupational licensing. So clearly someone had an issue who was trying to install an awning, and now there's a rule that prohibits us from doing an occupational license against that type of business. Florida League was against it, but unfortunately it got approved, and we'll see what happens from there.
Hey, Mike and Sandy, other than stating what everyone just learned, if they didn't know it already, and that is why Mike received the Home Rule Hero Award. He is our the beach's subject matter expert in a very short amount of time on legislative matters pertaining to local government, and we're proud in Atlantic Beach to work with Mike, and congrats again. We don't need to share the screen anymore, I don't think, and otherwise we're available for questions.
Yep.
All right. Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Kevin. We appreciate that. That was a lot in a short period of time, and I'm sure we've got even more that we can deal with. And let me pull up some of the questions that have been coming our way. Hold on, I've got to get my screen fixed up here, and there we are. Okay. Okay. Please ask them to explain where HB 403 stands at this time. Has the bill made it to the governor's desk? What are the biggest concerns for our neighborhoods if this bill is passed? And what can our cities do if HB 403 is signed by the governor?
Mike, I'm probably going to defer largely to you, but that is the home-based business bill.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So right now, my understanding is it's on the governor's desk. I don't believe. I'm trying to check. I'm not sure if that one has been signed yet. Yeah, actually, and actually, if Sandy's on the line, I think she can confirm. I do think this one actually was signed by the governor.
I don't think it's been sent to his desk yet.
Okay, we've gotten so many emails about ones that are going to his desk, which ones he's signed, which ones he's put in the pile to consider.
Yeah, my understanding, it hasn't been sent to him yet, which is why Beaches Watch is asking people to contact the governor now before it does get to his desk, because there is concern that once it gets to his desk, you know, he will probably, you know, he signs them pretty quickly, it seems.
Yeah, if people don't like the idea of having effectively unregulated business operating in the home next to them, which is also very akin to short-term vacation rentals, then they should contact the governor's office and ask that he not sign this particular bill. The concern I think that local governments have is that by it not being treated as a home office of convenience, but as a business and not having to register with the local jurisdiction, it becomes very questionable as to who's out there and who's not. And when you start getting complaints from the neighbors, you almost have to open an investigation to find out if it's a business, and if so, is it comporting with any of the rules that have been established at the state level. Typically, when the state imposes a rule or a preemption on local government, they don't necessarily put the resources behind it to actually enforce it themselves. So this is a great example where the state is telling us what we can't do, but they are not going to go out of their way to make sure that those businesses comply with the rules they put under state statutes. That will effectively become our responsibility to make sure that there are no more than 2 employees in the home at any given point in time, that there are no more than two purchasers of goods at the home at any given point in time. And how do you regulate that? You know, do you have a code enforcement officer sit out in front of the house for 8 hours, logging cars in and out and watching people go in and out? It becomes very unmanageable or untenable from that perspective. And that's why we don't like the state getting involved in identifying where businesses can be set up and what the regulations should be around.
Mike and Kevin, given what you said, what you just said, Mike, what is the argument? Can you explain to the audience tonight, what is the argument for passing such legislation, for putting such legislation into effect? What, or is there a fear of local governments? Is it, what is it? I mean, I think of you have a 10th Amendment that reserves the Constitution, that reserves powers to the state. And then I think it was in 1973, the Home Rule Act was passed by the, I think by the people of Florida. And there seems to be this chipping away. Why? How did we get here?
I think it comes back to a fundamental issue of the terminology property rights. Mm-hmm. The issue of short-term vacation rentals from years ago, several years ago, when they put those laws into effect, the proponents of preempting local government on short-term vacation rentals fell back on a fundamental belief that if you own property in the state of Florida, you should be able to do what you want with that property at your convenience. So the first shot across the bow was with regards to renting it out for short-term vacation rentals. This is kind of the second step in saying if you own a property, whether it's residential, commercial, whatever the case might be, if you want to be an entrepreneur and actually have a business run out of your house, we think that the state of Florida should allow you to do that regardless of what local government says.
Now, if somebody lives in an HOA, does this affect them?
You know, that's a good question. We probably have to read the final bill that may get signed, and if so, whether or not it exempts HOAs or deed restricted communities. One of the things I find interesting is that normally when it comes to preemptions in the state of Florida, those properties that are within deed restricted communities, as well as condo associations, are conveniently accepted out of any of the preemptions the state puts in place. They did that specifically with the short-term vacation rentals as well. So basically it affected municipal property, but if you were in a planned community that had homeowners association and deed restrictions, you can prevent your neighbor from renting out their property as a short-term vacation rental. If you live on a typical urban neighborhood, you cannot. And that's where the legislators tend to draw the line. I guess most of them live in planned unit development.
And indeed, everyone, HOAs and deed restricted communities are exempt in this case.
They are, Kevin?
Yep, that's what
Thank you, Kevin.
Okay. All right, down to another question. What concerns do our cities have on the anti-riot bill that was signed by the governor?
I'll take the first crack, which isn't going to provide much of an answer. With that person asking the question, if they're asking it of Atlantic Beach, I would encourage them to ask their elected officials, at least from at City Hall, from an administration standpoint. We have not addressed this, and that's probably a question to ask their local elected officials, and I'll be happy to connect them with our city commission members.
Sandy, that's all the questions that I am seeing. Let me see, there might be, somebody did post, I'm sorry, I almost missed this one. What are some of the actual required, what are some of the actual required uses of impact fees?
Impact fees are typically collected by a developer at the time of construction. And it's usually associated with the utility that's being installed to service the property. And in the case of residential property, it can also be transportation or mobility impact fees that are used for future transportation improvements. You can even go so far as to have parkland dedication fee, where if you are adding new housing into a neighborhood or into a community, then if you are not putting dedicated green space or park facilities as part of the development, you have to pay into a trust fund that goes towards capital construction. The attorneys will tell you that an impact fee, in order for it to be collected, there needs to be a rational nexus between what you're charging and how the money is going to be used. So, as an example, if you have a handful of vacant lots that have never been developed, and someone comes in and says, "I want to build 6 homes on those 6 vacant lots," and you were charging a parkland dedication fee, they would pay perhaps $2,000 per home that would go into a trust fund that is used to either acquire green space or construct new park facilities within the community. And that's to service the demand that is being created by the new development. So it's usually a comparison of the new development to the old development that existed and the impact being paid associated with it.
I've got one comment here, and I don't know if I'm going to be, I'll read it verbatim. Big issues that were not resolved at 24 hours operation, traffic and signage. I'm not smart enough to understand what that means. You two probably do.
Actually, I don't.
I don't either.
I know that's from Mayor Glasser, but I'm not sure what she was referring to.
Let's see, there's one more that's came in. All right, let's see. Jacksonville Beach was requesting $150,000 appropriated from the budget to put toward buying license plate readers for the police department, but the governor vetoed these funds. What will Jax Beach do next about getting license plate readers for the police department? I don't know if you could answer that.
I can. I can. We will see if we can submit for an appropriation again next year. In terms of the priority for the police department, this does not meet the critical priority to be funded at the local level, but clearly it provides a regional benefit to have license plate readers. So I've told our police chief we will continue to try and search for the state option of funding those license plate readers for at least the next year or two to see if we can get them through that means before we take a hard look to see if it's something that we have a dire need to pay for ourselves. For those that don't know what license plate readers do, they would actually be set up. I believe we had 17 different locations identified at all of the entrance and exit points to Jax Beach, which means that if there was a car that was traveling from St. Johns County into Jax Beach or from Jax Beach into St. Johns County, the license plate reader, if there was a be on lookout for that license plate, it would pop and notify our agency so we can identify to the neighboring agency, hey, you've got a criminal that's heading into your jurisdiction. You might remember, I think it was 2 years ago before the pandemic hit, we had criminals from somewhere in the Gulf states that had committed murder, and they were picked up on a license plate reader on I-95 traveling towards the Jacksonville metro area. They were ultimately found in Jax Beach with the vehicle parked at one of our end zones, but only after we and other agencies had to scurry around to try and find out if they even came into our neighborhoods. A license plate reader on JTB or Beach Boulevard would have given us the alert within 5 seconds of them crossing into our jurisdiction. We would have known they were in Jax Beach. We could have taken the appropriate steps to get them a lot sooner than we did than actually finding them out on the beach drinking and catching some rays.
Got another question. Thank you for your input and review. What ideas do you see coming up in the next session? And how can we best access funds for all the beaches for hurricane prep and climate issues? Who would like to jump in on that one?
I'll, if I may, Steve, before I address that a little bit, I'd like to acknowledge that the City of Atlantic Beach did receive a $500,000 appropriation from the legislature. and approved by the governor for phase 2 of our critical stormwater management project at Aquatic Gardens in Hopkins Creek. And it's with gratitude that we'll be having a check presentation here in a couple of weeks for that.
Nice.
The legislative priorities that Mike went over early on, a lot of those will extend into 2022. We encourage advocacy. There's power in numbers. If our city commission members hear from you on any of the topics that you want us to advocate for, get the ball rolling that way by contacting us at City Hall or any of your elected officials, and let us know what you want us to advocate for. We do have a handful of folks who are regularly in touch, and then if there's a hot button issue, we'll hear from a lot of people, and all that's great. And it's not limited to right before or during the legislative session. This is a year-round advocacy effort, and so please, we love hearing from our residents and businesses about what's on their mind as far as where they think we need to be turning in terms of improving the way we do business.
Mike, you want to add?
Yeah, I'll add that there's no rodents in our water tower.
Well, for those who don't see these things that somebody had posted, I read that down in South Florida, the water tower has some nasty rodents in it. Has ours in Jack's Beach been cleaned out? And I think we just heard yes. Next, do our cities hire lobbyists to help us in Tallahassee? If so, how did they help us this year?
I'll go first on that. The city of Jack's Beach does have lobbyists located in Tallahassee that we hire to help support us on critical issues. This year, well, there's two ways they help us. The first is they have relationships with all of the legislators that are up in Tallahassee. And so they understand what the legislators are thinking, where there are opportunities to perhaps sway a vote in a certain direction, or where someone is steadfast in their position. The second is that they're also able to give us the behind the scenes story on why a lot of the legislation has actually come to the forefront. So for instance, it would not be uncommon for our lobbyists to tell us that this particular legislator went to cut down a tree on his own property, and he was told by the local government he needed to have a permit to take down the tree. And he was so irate that he's now proposing legislation that would eliminate all tree removal permits. And that actually happened. That happened with a legislator from Sarasota County. So they're able to give us the background story as to why the legislation is being proposed in the first place. And then they're able to help tell us who are the ones that are steadfast because they're towing a particular line on how to vote on an item, and where we have the opportunity to actually make impact to either get the legislation rewritten to include better language, or perhaps get it stalled out in a committee and not even get it to move more forward. So our consultants this year, they kept, and I know that Sandy's on the line, but they kept us in continuous contact with them with emails, telling us where legislation was at certain points, who's on the committee, who are the ones that we should be contacting to try and make inroads with certain negotiations. And I think it's kind of invaluable, to be honest with you.
Kevin?
Please, thanks. Mike just gave a great lesson on lobbying and lobbyists and why it's important. And indeed, Atlantic Beach, the last few years has had a state lobbyist. And I guess one way of measuring whether we've gotten an ROI is that the last few years we have gotten lots of appropriations from the state, when the previous few years before that, without a lobbyist, we didn't. We think there's tremendous value, and we're getting great work out of our consultant as well.
Just had another one come in, and we still have time for one or two more if you want to post some. Speaking, let's see here. Okay, speaking of trees, are we having some programs to plant more in our parks?
With regards to Jacksonville Beach, the answer is yes. We, as an organization, are taking full advantage of the City of Jacksonville / Duval County tree program. About 24 months ago, we actually installed several $100,000 worth of trees at our golf course. We are now in the process of identifying more trees to be installed in other park areas around the city. And as we start talking about a possible urban trail system throughout our community, there's been a desire by the council to make sure that it is tree lined and shaded for people who are either walking or riding their bikes through the community. So we're definitely looking at more trees in Jacks Beach.
Kevin?
Steve, as you probably are very well aware, we are real busy replenishing our tree canopy in Atlantic Beach and preparing for the future. We have an environmental stewardship committee that is very engaged in this, along with our planning and community development department. We planted more than 300 trees in the last couple of years, many in parks and also many along rights of way, including but not limited to Plaza and Royal Palms. If those drives are suddenly much more beautiful, and just wait until those trees grow. So yes, that's an important part of what we do in Atlantic Beach because our citizens demand it.
Let's see, there is one more. This popped in. How about the area around the golf course in Jacks Beach? Could it become a bike path and walking path?
Possibly. We'll know once we have our consultant on board to help with the urban trail master plan. Internally, our staff have identified a lot of optional paths, and the area of the golf course in Wingate is definitely an area that's on the map. The question is, does it make sense to go through that area or go around that area? So we'll see as we get through the plan in the second half of this year, or I should say over the next 6 months.
Okay, thank you. I don't see any other questions. Oh, wait a minute. Yes, I do. Let's see, do our beach cities have e-newsletters? If so, how can citizens sign up to receive emails with information from the city?
I think the answer is yes and yes. And I believe for Jacks Beach, if you go to our website, I think you have the ability to sign up for it there. And Kevin, I'm not sure what you do for Atlantic Beach.
Among the many ways that someone can subscribe to our e-newsletter, which is, one of more than a half dozen ways that we communicate with our residents, is to send an email to info@coab.us. You can also go on our website and email us from there. And we have more than 6,200 subscribers to our e-newsletter. It's a very important way that we communicate with our residents.
Gentlemen, we've got a few minutes. Do you have any parting comments either of you would like to say? I know I came in here as the third grader in the room, figure I'm going to get an education. I did. I'm leaving as a first grader. You guys know so much. I don't know where you get the time to digest this. So we appreciate you being with us, but do you have one last thing that you'd like to say? Maybe 30 seconds or so.
I'll go first. First, thank you for having us tonight and the opportunity to speak to anyone who's listening or will watch this at a later date. It's not an annual issue. It is a continuous issue in terms of dealing with the legislators in Tallahassee. Stay connected with your elected officials. Follow the information that we're putting out there with regards to contacting local legislators to either vote yay or nay on topics. We're trying to make the best decisions for the communities here at the beaches. And sometimes we may need your input and sometimes we may need your action.
Thank you, Mike. Kevin.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Mike carried the load here today. He clearly is the one who knows this. I was, as people could tell, probably I read half of what I said because I was reporting more than as things that I know. But Mike, I just you mentioned, actually someone asked about the golf course. I'm smitten with your golf course. It's and I can't imagine it even being prettier and better around it. Congrats on that great public amenity, and it's just super working with our colleagues in Jacks Beach and Neptune Beach, both the administrative leadership and political leadership, and Beaches Watch. Oh my goodness, what a great role, wonderful role that y'all continue all these years later to provide. Thank you for this opportunity.
And thanks for joining us once again. And we thank everybody who is in the room tonight and joined us. We're looking forward to sometime in the near future. We're going to actually see you face to face. Not sure when that'll be, but we certainly are looking forward to it. And we appreciate the questions that you put forth and the time that Mike and Kevin put into this. Once again, thanks to everybody. Thank you for participating. There is a short survey. It doesn't take long. It's 4 short questions. You circle a number on each one. And then you can type in, you can tell Mike and Kevin how great they were. They'd love that. And Maria that you missed her. Don't forget to watch the recording of the meeting. You're going to find it. You'll see that on the screen. Also, YouTube, Facebook, and our Beaches Watch website. July 7th, our next meeting with the police chiefs. You do not want to miss that one either. And I think that does it. Don't forget to renew your membership. Get a neighbor to join with you. And we appreciate you being with us. And unless I hear from somebody, I think our meeting is adjourned. If I had a gavel, I'd go ding. But I
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Kevin.
Thanks, Steve, Sandy, Mike, thanks so much.
Take care.